to meet and chat with our chilled and charming Chairman of Change. Let's all say Hassa Digga Ibawai as we get our fill with Mr. Darren Hill. Please welcome Darren, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, mate. So, I think I've got my own, yeah. It's a really surreal experience getting introduced by the best MC in the business, Andrew Klein. How good is it? It's fantastic. And the surreal experience is you sit over there in the seat listening to your own introduction going, I'm actually starting to look forward to hearing myself speak this morning. So thanks, Andrew, doing a wonderful job. I am a behavioural scientist. It effectively just means that I get to do for a living what most people do as a hobby. So, and I want to put that to the test for a second, but hands up if you like to do a bit of people watching in your spare time. So, lots of us, right? In fact, most of us. We like to go to places to watch people. Shopping centres are fantastic. Airports are as good as it gets. And even conferences can be great, right? So in those breaks, just it's awesome to watch. And I got to thinking the other day, and I thought to myself, imagine if people watching could be a bit like bird watching. So you know with bird watching where you get the rare species book and you walk around the bush looking for stuff. Imagine if you had one of those for people. You'd go, hey, look. It's an untattooed 20-something-year-old male. Haven't seen one of those in ages. And like, you'd be walking around. Oh, look, don't scare them away, but I think it's a clean-smelling backpacker. Yeah. And then it could be like, oh, shit, haven't seen one of these in years, but it looks, maybe even decades. It looks like a Parramatta Eels supporter with hope in their eyes. But we know that we haven't seen one of those in a good while, but... So I love to watch people, and most of us do. But one of the other things I love is to come and speak at conferences like this, and I love this conference in particular, the future of leadership. I love it for two reasons. Number one, I love the cause and the charity that it supports. Hands Across the Water do some amazing work over in Thailand with kids at risk and at need. And the second reason why I love speaking at this conference is having spoken at it every year, I challenge myself to come up with a new topic every year. And so in previous years, we've looked at the science of leadership, how our neurochemistry drives our actions and our reactions amongst us and the people that we lead. We looked at the psychological construct of ownership. So what is it and how do we actually help people take a greater level of ownership in the work that they do? Last year, we looked at belief and looked at placebo and how we could use that to help us influence and motivate and so on. And this year was no different. I wanted to come up with a new topic area, but this year, even though I wanted to come up with something different, I used a different approach. And the approach that I used was to use my favourite cognitive bias, one called, and we just probably need to pull that audio level down a touch by the sounds, but the Dunning-Kruger Effect. So the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which all of us have as a cognitive bias, it just affects us in certain ways. But it's basically a consolidation of information. So how do we take on information and then encode it? And what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, if we look at two states of confidence, so how well we think we know something versus wisdom, how well we tend to know it. Still getting a bit of reverb there, guys, so I don't know whether we can sort that out. Is that just me? Yeah, it's everyone? Yeah. Kind of get ringing in my head most of the time and other voices in my head, so I just wanted to check in. What we see with the Dunning-Kruger effect is when we're exposed to information, something curious happens to us. What happens is our confidence skyrockets in the earliest of days, even before wisdom's really started to emerge for us. So think in terms of a university graduate or an apprentice. They've kind of just learnt their art and craft, and it's like they can't even be told about it because I know everything there is to know about it. But then what happens over time is we get this crisis of confidence that starts to emerge as true wisdom and knowledge starts to emerge for us. And what happens is we start to come to this sudden realisation that there are libraries filled with information that we're yet to learn about the topic area that we thought we had really nailed. And I love the researchers, they looked at this overinflated peak of confidence. They called that Mount Stupid. Yes, I have stood up the top of Mount Stupid. In fact, I haven't just stood up the top of it, I've taken selfies up there. I've camped out for not just days, but even weeks and months on end. And I think that we've all had that experience. In fact, I shared the Dunning-Kruger Effect with one of my heavy industry clients, and a guy by the name of Paul, he was a general manager, and he said, mate, that bloody Mount Stupid, I haven't just spent time up there. I took a D8 dozer up the top. I levelled all the trees just so I could get a really good look from there. And so I think we've all had time up the top of Mount Stupid. And for me, I wanted to challenge myself around this year's talk was, what is it, and I challenged myself specifically through the lens of Dunning-Kruger is around two key questions. Number one, what is it that I've held to be true around leadership that might not be the case? And number two, do we actually need to look at our current narrative around leadership in a different fashion? And that's what guided my thinking, and it's where it took me in today's talk. As I approach the halfway point of my life, there should be some, there we go. I might just start that again actually, just to make sure we got this, because those two quick questions really guide this talk, and I really want to make sure that I land this point with you. As I approach the halfway point of my life, I realise something as true as the constant ebb of a tide. It's a fact, I've forgotten enough stuff to fill an ocean. It's all gone, forgotten, washed away and lost at sea. But I don't pine or regret the things I forget, because it's not the everyday task that fills our flask and gives us a life well lived. And if we can change our filter from what we've lost to what we gain, it softens the hurt and frees us from pain, and in the space we create for our mind, we find that it's these moments that shape us, mould us and make us. Take my pop, although only 5'6", he seemed like a giant to me. As just a little tacker, I followed him round like a tracker, tapping into the wisdom born of hard times. A life lived with war and depression, both mental and recession. He shared these lessons with me over a steaming pot of Billy tea. And I drunk it in, not just the tea, but me and him, and Monte Carlo Bicky from the Arnott's tin. And it was such a gift, but not a gift wrapped in a bow or a sugary treat. No, the gift was a present, and being present was the gift. And again, it rings true for me and for you, that it's these moments that shape our lives. It's the moments that matter. Like the time I spotted a woman across the space, and I realised in an instant that I deserved more than I was getting and given than the life I was living. I decided right there and then that I needed three to be a better man, to be enough, and to be a part of her life. And nearly 2 decades on, I'm still trying. She's now my wife. And these days, I'm wise enough not to huff or puff or call a bluff. No, I just try my best to be enough. I'm hoping she'll keep me around for a few more years yet, but only if I never forget that she is the best part of me. You see, it's moments like these, it's not the minty moments, it's the squinty moments, the ones where we close our eyes tight and try and see ourselves right in that place again. It can be the magical moment of a child being born, or when our world falls apart and we mourn. Standing on a rainy day in a cemetery, it's the last place on earth that we'd want to be. Wondering, wishing, pining and regretting there might have been a lost chance of a hug or a kiss, but amongst all the pain, the grief, the promises to turn over a leaf, all we're left with to comfort us is it's these moments. And yet still they say that Rome wasn't built in a day, and they preach this thing that consistency is king, but it's just a story told to stop us from being bold, to conform and fit in. Because that's how cities are built and that's how factories are run. But what about us on the edge of this new dawn? The future of work, it is upon us, and we'll need the bravest of souls. And I stand and I ask you a serious question. Are you ready to lead us? Are you? Are you? Because maybe it's a person who makes a speech and steps into the breach and says, come this way. Or perhaps it's a mouse that rocks the house, but not through voice, through style and art. Because even a tiny mouse's roar can crash down a door, and the creative spirit of a well-written verse, well, it can shake its own piece of the universe. But the ball's in your court. We need you to step up and lead us, to find the very best of us, not just the rest of us. How will you create your leadership moments? Well, you could strategize, you could conceptualize, you could put it all on the line and risk it. Or you could just start real simple, with a cup of tea and a Monte Carlo biscuit. Thank you. In 2016, or March of 2016 to be specific, it was like Christmas had come twice for me in the space of 3 or 4 months. One of my bucket list speaker people, bucket list dinner party people, you know, when you sort of have that combo and go, who's the 5 people you'd invite to a dinner party? And you can immediately think of some famous people or really cool people. For me, one of those people, without doubt, on my top 5 people list is Dr. Brené Brown, a grounded theory researcher from the University of Houston in Texas, 5 New York Times best-selling books, 3rd biggest watched TED Talk of all time. The woman is an intellectual giant, and she's come at the right time for us, I'm convinced of it. She was coming to Sydney in March of 2016 for 2 events in the space of 18 hours, and I was on a plane to see both of those. The State Theatre in Sydney held a nighttime event where she was just absolutely spectacular. And then the next morning, the wonderful Business Chicks hosted a leaders' breakfast where she'd done a workshop over a couple of hours on leadership and vulnerability. I was the only male in the village, but I was quite happy to be there. That was all fine. And she started really interestingly with a question to the audience, and that question was seeking permission for her to go off script and share some recent data that had literally landed on her desk overnight. And so we, of course, went, go for it. She went on to share the most recent findings of her team, of which I believe to be the driver for her book that's coming out next year, where they went into Fortune 500 companies, 95% of the data conducted with those leaders and people within those organisations, specifically looking at how does a leader build trust with their team. So before I share some of those results, just with, you've already kind of been doing a bit of the person beside you, so ignore the person who has been a bit rubbish this morning, just talk to the person who's been amazing. Oh, I don't know whether that's a trust building exercise, but anyway, have a chat. What do you think are some of the really specific, and you've got like 15 seconds just to say the first things that come out of your mouth. How do you think a leader builds trust with their team? Go, really fast. Okay. So curious as to what were the first instant responses that you might have had, but I'll share the top response that came back from the data. So grounded theory research, it isn't classic statistical research where we just get a bunch of ones and zeros and crunch those numbers to sort of see what sort of factors come out. It's actually testimony, so doing long form interviews with people and then examining keywords and phrases to see what data comes out. And the number one response on how a leader builds trust with their team is they ask their team for help. So it seems so obvious, but it's an expression of vulnerability and it kind of competes against the existing narrative of the leader should have all the answers, shouldn't they? But it's one of the number one trust building exercises. Went on to talk about others. So one of the biggest trust building exercises or behaviours that a leader can have with their team is when they step into conflict, not away from it, when they avoid it. And we've all had that experience, haven't we, where a leader should have stepped up to the mark, but they didn't. Went on to list a few others. But there was one particular anomaly she spoke of, and whilst she used that term anomaly, not outlier. So it had occurred time and time again in the testimony, but it wasn't something that the researchers had predicted. And that anomaly, that behaviour was when a leader attends a funeral. So when a leader attends a funeral. So when someone in my team has lost someone close to them, and if I'm a leader and my presence at that funeral had a huge impact on the trust between not just that person and the leader, but also wider through the team. And so this got me to thinking was every one of the areas that she listed all seem to be around these finite specific moments. And the challenge for it was that I genuinely think it competes against a really big existing narrative that we have around leadership, and that is to be consistent as leaders, to keep turning up day in, day out. Small actions make all the difference. Because this is kind of like the existing narrative. What I hear is just keep it consistent, do it the same over and over. Trust is built one brick at a time, over and over. Yet when I look at this, I see a big problem. And the big problem, and I don't know whether you can spot it, is that looks nothing like life. Life looks a lot more like this, doesn't it? It has ups and downs, and it has more smaller, insignificant moments. And even Kieran spoke about that in her talk, where we kind of go through so much of our day where we're not even we're almost on autopilot. But then there's these moments, and these moments they kind of look very much like the thing that gives us life itself. They are a heartbeat in itself. In fact, I contest is that these moments are out from the norm. They are the heartbeat of life itself. They're the things we remember. So it was only Monday week ago when we had a funeral. We had a loss in our family of a wonderful matriarch who died at the age of 98, and believe it or not, it come as a shock to us because she was such an extraordinary woman. We thought her passing would at least be a decade away. But what did they speak of in her funeral? They didn't speak about the small things. They spoke about those moments, the ones outside the norm, the ones that crafted and shaped her experience with others. And so, again, what we've got are these moments, and they serve a couple of incredibly important areas for us from a neuroscience point of view. And the first big one around that is they extinguish or help us let go of all the small stuff. So they create a space for us to be able to conveniently let go and forget all the noise. And we really need this at this point in time, don't we? Because it sounds like the verbs over that side, so I'm just going to hang over this side. It's not that I don't love you all over there. So we go for lunch to Subway, and I don't know whether you've ever thought about this, because I do, and it probably shows that I have far too much time on my hands to consider this type of stuff. But given all of the condiments, all of the breads, all the types of meats, all the possible options that you could create in a Subway sandwich, I actually sat down and done the factorials and had a look at it, and it turns out there's 1.38 billion possible options on what type of sandwich. It's everything from a tomato sauce sandwich to a 7-kilo sandwich with every bit of bread and every bit of meat and everything that you could possibly imagine. We need to forget that stuff. That's why we often walk in and we'll just go and meatball sub, right? We make it simple for us because we can't possibly hang on to all this stuff. So one of the things is it takes an enormous amount of energy to remember all the small stuff, so moments give us the ability to forget it. Number two is it helps us to be sociable. So the big 5 personality traits, which they talk about time and time again, that they're the ones that matter. One of the big ones for our sociability and the ability to work within groups is agreeableness. I actually asked my team to look at this because what it seemed like to me anecdotally is that people with outstanding memories, except for Kieran Flanagan, she's an outlier, by the way, she's just delightful. But for most people who have outstanding memories, well, they're just a little bit of an arsehole, aren't they? Yeah? Haven't you ever noticed, like you're in a team meeting or something like that, and you come up with this fantastic idea and you go, I've got it, here's the idea on the ABC thing, and Barry turns around and says, no, we tried that in 1972. Don't be like Barry, right? So the interesting thing is I didn't want this to just be anecdotal research, so I sent my team at Pragmatic Thinking, a few of them who love the research bit of it, and I said, go and find me, agreeableness matching with ability for memory, and let's see whether we get a trend. Turns out that they were scarred themselves in the research because this is what they come back to me with. So maybe that exposure to those people just really had quite a strong correlation there, a 0.77 coefficient. But anyway, so we need to be able to forget stuff to be sociable creatures, right? We know this within our marriages, don't we, Alison? We need to be able to let go and forget stuff. But the world encourages us not to forget stuff. So, I mean, what about Forgotify? It's an app where it encourages, says, don't forget all the songs. There's been like 4 million songs that have never been played. You can rescue them and make sure that they're never forgotten. I downloaded that app. I downloaded one of those songs. I listened to that song. It was rubbish. We should forget those songs. There are things in our life that we should let go of and send through to the keeper without touching. So moments provide not just simply the colour in our lives, they provide the ability for us to both function efficiently and also be sociable. Here's the thing is all that small stuff that you sweat as a boss thinking that your staff pay attention to, they don't remember any of it. What they really remember is how you showed up to the big moments, how you created the big moments. How did you act when that, in the first 24 hours of that restructure getting announced? Did you bury yourself in work, meaningful, like, consistent work, or did you step up and show up? Because that's what they remember. These are the questions we've got to ask ourselves as a leader is well-intentioned effort that's not remembered doesn't nearly kick in as much as the stuff that we do remember. And so I guess we get to this point of, well, what is the anatomy of a moment? And taking sort of 20 years worth of research and doing basically a crude lit review, we've found that there's 4 key areas, 4 key experiences that memories or moments are crafted for us. The first of those, obviously, is something outside the ordinary. So an extraordinary moment, something that's not just the everyday, but something that changes the everyday and makes it something extraordinary. The second one is moments of discovery. So where we have this crystallization of thinking, often that can be sitting in our subconscious for years and years, and all of a sudden it fuses in that kind of moment. It could be that aha moment or that sudden realization where you learn something about yourself, your job, someone else around you. Moments of discovery are where we create moments as well. Achievement, of course, is a big one. And curiously, what we find is that it's not your everyday achievements like KPIs and more expected or predicted ones. It generally, the bigger the moment around achievement is directly related to the bigger the challenge that you overcome. So the bigger the challenge, the bigger the moment of achievement. And then the last one, of course, is connection, but it's not just connection of ourself to others. It can be connection to ourselves and our inner self, but it also can be connection to something bigger than ourselves as well. And so that effectively is there's one thing missing, the one thing that ties this all together, and that is emotion. So the deeper the emotion, coupled with these experiences, is that's how our brain creates moments for us. Now, because we know this, it gives us the ability as leaders to generate them and manufacture them for the greater good, but also what we can do is we can help our own teams create these moments ourselves. And so with the time I've got left, I'm just going to give you 2 examples of 2 sort of moments that are created amongst these, but I'm going to stick a couple together because even our biggest moments can actually capture multiple experiences with deep emotion to stick in our brains for a long time. And the one I wanted to share with you around extraordinary moments, so something outside the ordinary with discovery, happened within our own team, and it happened in the team at Pragmatic back in February of this year. We do quarterlies because we go in with organisations and help them with leadership and culture. We focus a lot on culture ourselves. We want to be an organisation that walks what we talk, so we spend a lot of time on it, and one of those regular rituals is every quarter we get offline just to talk about culture. To start the year, we had a 2-day offsite down in Kingscliff, beautiful northern sort of, what's it called? Northern New South Wales, the rivers, yeah. And we had a couple of days at the Australian elite surfing area there, not because we went surfing, but because it was a good room, it was a good space, and with the hope of seeing, it was fantastic. So we're in Kingscliff, and we decided what we needed to do with our team in 2018 this year is we needed to really focus in on the message that is state. So how do we turn up physically with joy and a spirit to the work we do? Because we do awesome work, but it takes its toll. It's hard work. As you can imagine, being change agents within organisations, helping people manage change, just like Kieran talked about, is hard work. It's fulfilling work, but it takes a lot out of you. And in 2017, we kind of limped across the line a little bit. So we wanted to focus on that message with our staff around how do we turn up in great state? How do we turn up with joy? And so we thought long and hard, who's someone that we think embodies that better than anyone else on the planet? And so we could think of no other person than Professor Tommy Franklin. So for some people, you might know Tommy Franklin as the dancing man from Byron Bay. Rocks a mean flower beard for sure, but he first came to fame with a Trot Fest short video that talked about him and his joyful dancing at Byron Bay and how it had moved the masses. But then he really came to fame when he made the finalist on Australia's Got Talent, and went all the way through to the grand final simply by just getting up on stage and dancing and turning up all in. So we had a morning with Tommy on the beach, broad daylight, 8 o'clock in the morning, as morning walkers are going past with their dogs and so on, and we just had a fantastic time. It was amazing to learn from him, and yes, we really did just rip it out and have a good crack at it, a bit like Tommy does in a second. Yeah, here we go. Ready? Yeah, I got all that going on. And so it was a moment that was outside the ordinary, and it was a moment that's long remembered by our team. But it wasn't just about this, it was also discovery. For my team, what they had this moment of amazing discovery that yes, their boss is an amazing dancer. I always knew it, of course, but they just went, hey, that bloke, I didn't realise how amazing he is. But I also had a moment of discovery as well, and you can actually see it in this picture if we zoom in. My moment of discovery, so there's my face and my nostrils, and there's Tommy's armpit. And my moment of discovery is that Tommy Franklin smells like rainbow drops. He just smells so amazing, like it's just fantastic. But it was coupling both achievement, extraordinary moments, just a simple quarterly, turned on its head, but then moments of discovery on how we show up, and the team still talk about that today. The other example that I wanted to share was where we couple achievement and connection. And again, achievement, it's strengthened by how big the challenge it is that you overcome. And I can't think of a better example than these Hands Across the Water bike rides that happen every January. I've been on 3 of those. But what makes these so extraordinary is the fact that 75% of people who go on that ride go again. And it's not as just simple as going on a bike ride. You've got to raise $10,000 for charity. You pay about $5,000 of your own money to actually have the privilege of going on it. So that's the financial component. But then, of course, there's the physical challenge of riding a bike 800 kilometres in January in Thailand. Now, for those who aren't bike riders in the room, 800 k's on a bike's a really long way. It's the equivalent of riding from Brisbane to London and back, right? Now, it's not the scale, but it bloody feels that far. And you finish these bike rides and you doubt yourself through the fundraising, you doubt yourself through the physical effort, and then you finish and arrive at one of these magnificent facilities that Hands contributes to, and that's where you don't just have achievement, but you understand connection at a deep level. A connection to yourself through the physical duress of making the bike rides and the connection to self of overcoming the doubts in the fundraising. But beyond that, what you do is you get connected to something bigger than yourself. And almost every person I've ever spoken to who's been on that ride, the thing they get connected to the most is gratitude. It's the most powerful of all emotions. And when we can tap into that, it makes life better, never worse. And so that moment, those experiences, create amazing moments for us. And so there is your anatomy of a moment for you to take forward with your teams and ask yourself the question as leaders, how can I generate these moments for my people? And I guess there's one final question that needs answering before I leave the stage, and that is, how do we not miss these moments? How do we, because they happen on almost a daily basis, but how do we make sure that we don't miss them? It's quite simple when we look at the time frame of the moment. Is there's always this preceding question or statement that precedes itself that says, what if? And it couples really beautifully alongside what Kieran talked about with creativity. But what if? What if we could think different, change different, behave different, lead different? And then what happens is a moment. The challenge for us is that if we don't respond to that what if quickly becomes replaced with if only. And that's where regret lies. It's the most lonely place on the planet when you come to think about it. And so for us, the last, I guess, thought that I'd leave you in all the preparation and the study and the research I've done for this talk is that we're so often encouraged in our lives to live for the moment. But I'd like to reframe that from today and every day forward for you in your role as a leader, is instead of just living for the moment, why not lead for the moment? It's the only thing your staff will really